Put your hands together for Max Moore, everyone.
Thank you very much. Let's see if we can get the slide up here. So, you guys have probably heard all this talk about the 1%, and some of you are probably griping, why can't I be one of the 1% that have all the money and wealth and power? Well, never mind that nonsense. You can be much more elite than that. And it doesn't require a huge amount of money. It just requires you being able to think for yourselves, challenge accepted ideas, and you can become one of the vanishing small fraction of 0.00002%. So some of you I know are not that familiar with cryonics, so I'll give you a very brief idea of my talk on magic mushrooms. The basic idea of cryonics, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is this is an idea that's a natural consequence, it seems to me, of what Aubrey's doing. I've been interested in life extension for many decades. It's before I stopped growing even. And progress has been rather slow. So what can you do in the meantime? If you really want to keep living, you love life, you want more of it, you're very curious about the future, you want to be part of it, to create it, what can you do? What if you don't make it? What if you get some horrible disease? What if you have a heart attack or a car accident before we make these longevity breakthroughs? Well, that's where cryonics comes in. It really is true life insurance. You really are insuring your life. Really, the idea here is that you can think of it as a form of medical time travel. Now, by that I mean, today, if one of you was to keel over because you were so excited at my talk that you had a heart attack, then what would we do? Well, we probably realize that here, we probably don't have the medical technology and skills to revive you, bring you back to life. But unlike 50 years ago, just because your heart stopped beating and you stopped breathing, we wouldn't say, oh, he's dead, just let him go. We would say, call an ambulance. And we would take you from here through space to another location where they had more advanced skills and medical technology. And you, who would be dead by the standards of a few decades ago, would be pounced on by professionals. You might have CPR done to you, you might get a defibrillator, you might even have some drugs injected into you. And quite likely you'll come back to life and say, thank you very much. So cryonics is very much like that, except rather than taking you through space, what we're doing is we're reaching you at the point at which you are clinically dead, which really means you're just a little teeny bit dead, but mostly alive. All your cells are pretty much intact, your neurons are still there, you're just not functioning too well. And what we do is we do various things to you, which I'll describe very briefly, and we try to put you into an unchanging state, a state of biostasis, if you like, where nothing is changing and doing as little damage as possible in that process. And then we're taking you from the present into the future, one day at a time, until not only if we develop the kind of technologies that Aubrey's talking about, where we can control the aging process and reverse it, but we can also reverse whatever killed you, any additional damage done by the cryopreservation process itself, and bring you back. So that's really the basic idea. Now, okay, well, can it work? It sounds like a good idea. If you enjoy living and don't want to die, it seems like just another medical procedure, just as you would have major heart surgery if you had to have it to save your life, or perhaps chemotherapy, horrible as it is. You might do this, but will it work? What's the evidence for it? Well, actually, contrary to rather ignorant people like Michael Shermer, who's known as a skeptic but didn't actually really do his homework on this topic, there is direct evidence for it. Not only can we point to the use of low temperatures in medicine, which are still above freezing, but we can show that it's being increasingly widely used in medicine to lower the temperature of patients undergoing delicate surgery, especially brain surgery, because that slows down all kinds of metabolic processes and gives you more time. But we can also point to CAT scans of cryopreserved brains at a liquid nitrogen temperature. We can show you electron microscope studies of brain tissue that is being cryopreserved in the same way that we do our patients. So we're storing people through a process that involves washing out as much blood as possible. We don't want to form ice crystals. That's the way we did it in the bad old days, and it does a tremendous amount of damage. And yes, I don't know if people who are preserved with those methods will come back or to what degree. But we now remove as much of the body fluid as possible, replace it with a cryoprotectant, which you can think of as a kind of medical-grade antifreeze. It's an easy way of thinking about it. So it's a very high concentration of this chemical, so that as we cool you down below the freezing point and gradually towards liquid nitrogen temperature at a nice chilly minus 196 degrees C, instead of crystallizing and forming sharp edges which damage cell membranes, Instead, it just gets thicker and thicker until it forms a glass-like solid substance with no internal structure. It just holds the cells in place. So we know from these electron microscope studies and other evidence that so long as the conditions are reasonably good, we don't have a patient with a horribly huge brain aneurysm or someone we haven't managed to get to for several days, under reasonable circumstances, we have direct evidence that we are preserving, to use the fashionable word of today, the connectome. We are preserving the synapses. We can see the synaptic vesicles. We can see those connections are still intact. These patients are not dead in any ultimate sense of the term. A little higher? Oh, okay. So there is direct evidence, not just some theoretical argument, that these people are still potentially viable. Now, a lot of people say, well, what's the point of doing this? Because have you ever brought anybody back? And they look very smug. Huh, ever brought anybody back? Well, that's kind of a stupid question. It's not stupid in a bad way, it's just an ignorant question, because clearly there are two parts to this process, right? The first thing to do is the conservative practice of stopping the person getting worse. That's what medical people do. They stop people getting worse. And then we move on to the next stage, which is making them better. Right now, we don't have the level of technology to make those people better. We're just doing the first part, stopping them getting worse. We're going to have to wait until we have much more advanced medical technologies, whether it's nanomedicine or some other unforeseen technology, to go into the individual cells, into those 100 billion neurons and all the other cells in the body, and repair the damage, reverse the aging process, reverse the additional damage done by the certain toxicity of the cryoprotectants that we're currently still having to use. So really that's our responsibility. Stop things getting worse and wait until the future can improve things. So why isn't this more popular? Why is it that we have such a tiny fraction of people? Why is it that there are only about 1,500 people out of 7 billion signed up for this? We've actually made these arrangements. To me, that sounds just crazy. Why is it everybody seems to think it's perfectly okay when you die or Uncle Fred is getting ill or Aunt Matilda, instead of getting a cryopreserve, the sensible, obvious thing to do, instead we throw them in the ground and let them get eaten up by bacteria or worms. Or we shove them into a gigantic oven until their head explodes. Very odd. People have strange reactions to cryonics. My dissertation advisor, who was a very smart philosopher, technically trained from MIT, had no arguments against it, but her reaction was that, well, this is just ghastly. As compared to the alternative? I don't think so. Now, some people say, well, we don't want to do this because it's expensive. And yes, there is some cost associated with it, but what a lot of people don't realize is that the amount of money you have to put in, which currently is a minimum amount of $200,000 for a whole body cryopreservation, or $80,000 for a neuropreservation, just storing the brain with the idea that we can regenerate using advanced technology, regenerate a body or clone it and do a transplant. That kind of money you don't have to come up with up front. You don't have to be part of the 1% to be part of this percent. What you do is you buy a life insurance policy, or maybe you already have one and you can just change the beneficiary. So this is really within the means of the vast majority of people. Another big reason why people don't do this is they say, well, or they think implicitly, well, people will think I'm kind of weird. They'll think I'm strange. What will my relatives think? What will my wife or husband or my son or daughter think? What will my friends say? And unfortunately, that's a very powerful effect. The power of social proof and standard practice is very, very powerful. I'm thinking maybe at this audience, there's a lot of people here, a little bit non-conventional, a little bit different. Maybe that's not such a strong effect, so I'm hoping that's the case, that we'd be willing to think about it. Of course, a lot of people are in denial of death. They don't want to think about it. It's a very unpleasant idea. One thing I think is also very powerful is the thought that, well, when I come back, I don't know how long that's going to be. Will it be decades? Will it be a century or two? What will the future be like? Will I know anybody? Will I be alone? Will I be obsolete? Will anybody care? And that's not one I would dismiss lightly at all. But really, is that a reason just to give up and die? I don't think so. I mean, I've had some experience of this. I used to live in England. I left there in 1987 and came over to right around here, Southern California, to go to USC. And frankly, that was like moving to an alien planet. The atmosphere was totally different. For one thing, the country I left, people spoke English. Also, we had water falling from the sky continually. Here, it was strangely bright. People looked happy and healthy and more attractive. But somehow I managed to deal with it. I got by. There are even people who've moved from Aboriginal Australia to New York City. It can't be much more of a drastic change than that. Some of those people struggled, to be true. Others did did quite well. It's really a matter of your inherent personality. Do you like adventure? Do you like change? Do you like a challenge? And the idea that you will be alone in that future, I think, is mistaken, especially if you join us and come along with us. You're going to have friends. Bring your friends and family along. Persuade them to do the same smart thing, and you won't be alone. And I think if cryonics catches on, as it surely must, unless people are completely crazy, then there will be people probably professionally trained to help you get restarted in society and reintegrate. You can also, I don't really have time to go into the details, but it's quite possible to set up individual trusts where you can put some money in, and over time that will grow. And over a century, compound interest does pretty amazing things. So you'll actually have some money to deal with coming back to life. So people say, well, why would I bother? And there really isn't a good answer to that. Either you get it or you don't. Either you enjoy living, either when you got up this morning you thought, oh, good, I'm glad I'm alive, or you think, oh, damn, I wish I died last night. Now, if you're not one of the latter, why would you not want another day, and another day, and another day? After all, there's some advantages to coming back. First of all, not everybody will agree, but I think in general, things get better over time. We have steps backward. We have some pretty big steps backward in the 20th century. But overall, if you go back to any part of human history and ask yourself, would I really want to live then as opposed to now? I think honestly you have to say, no, not really. I might have been a slave. I might have been, if you're a woman, just about any time in human history would have been inferior to fairly recent history. We didn't have any painkillers. We died a lot younger. Generally, things were pretty bad. So yeah, it's popular and fashionable to gripe and groan about things today, and it's important to keep improving things. But generally, the long trend is, I think, a good one. Also, think of it this way. What sucks about aging right now is your body and brain are falling apart just as you're starting to figure a few things out in life. I mean, you start off with nothing, right? You're ignorant of the world. You start to learn as you go along. But just as you learn some things and say, oh, great, now I'm ready to really start putting things into action. Oh, God, my knee hurts. Oh, what was I just thinking? Oh. Everything is falling apart on you. So here, we're talking about a future in which you come back with all of your experience, all of your knowledge, in your prime condition. In fact, probably better than your prime condition. You'll probably come back with any kind of defects fixed, any eyesight problems. If you have problems with your memory, like I'm very poor at remembering names, my apologies to anybody who's come up and I've had to ask them their name again, that will be fixed. We'll probably go into those parts of the brain where we deal with short-term memory and concentration, and we'll upgrade them. So you'll come back not only with that knowledge and wisdom, but in better health than you've ever enjoyed. So I want to leave just a couple of minutes for questions if I can. So my basic plea is, you may think this is an odd idea, but give it some serious consideration. We have a table upstairs with some basic information, and of course the website at alcor.org has a lot of information. So don't look like a bozo from the future, because it will be, in the future, people will look back on the present time and say, what the hell were people thinking, burying and burning themselves when there were better options? So instead, join the sensible small group of people and try and raise that percentage. Put on your life vest. Give it another chance. Thank you very much. We have 1 minute, 45 seconds for questions. Doug.
Max, you've been a proponent of cryonics for, 20 or 25 years, something like that? And until just recently, that was all unpaid. I'm wondering how it's been different for you and how audiences react to you now that you're actually in a position where you're being paid meagerly to promote cryonics rather than before when you were just doing it as an enthusiastic proponent.
Well, for me, nothing has changed. I actually made my own arrangements for cryopreservation back in 1986. I know you think, no way, you're not that old, that's not possible. But it's true. 1986, and I've been involved in promoting it since the mid-80s. And to me, it's a natural outgrowth of life extension. So getting paid for it is nice, but it's mostly not getting paid for promoting it. I mostly get paid for running the organization. But an important part of that is trying to get the word out. But to me, that really hasn't made any difference.
Hi. How long do you think it would take for someone to be reanimated in between the process of them being cryogenically frozen?
I really don't know. I don't like ever giving forecasts and predictions of the future, because one thing we can be sure of from the past is that you're almost certainly going to be wrong. So I'm not going to give any specific dates. What I will say is we have a kind of a principle that first one in, last one out. And conversely, last one in, first one out, because our technology has improved over time. As I mentioned earlier on, we didn't really do much but use a bit of glycerol, but basically a lot of ice crystal formation happened and a lot of damage was done. Now, under reasonable conditions, we do a much better job. So the people who are cryopreserved later will get much better treatment and will come back sooner. We may not even need an advanced nanotechnology to bring them back. It might be a much simpler process when we vitrify them. As to how long, I'm not going to even guess. It's decades to a century or two. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. So please, I'll be around today and until tomorrow morning. So any questions, please come up and ask me. And our booth is 2 stories directly above here. Please come pick up some information. Thank you very much.